Yet again, we're back in the smallest book of the Old Testament, Obadiah. We did the historical context last week, talking about the historical feud between Judah and Jacob. Then he gets a name change. I should have just said Israel and Edom, or Jacob and Esau, the historical feud that they had. We did the historical context to it, and we went through the first 3 verses of this really small book of the Bible that when I was sharing with everyone that it was the least read book of the Bible because of how small it was and overlooked. And how I believe we should take some time to focus on it. So I'm going to pick up where we left off in verse 3. It's like the overlap. So it says, the pride of thy heart. This is God essentially diagnosing what the sin of the nation of Edom, the children of Esau, is. What is their illness? What is their sickness? What is the sin that is blighting them and is going to cause God's wrath upon them? It happens to be the pride of their hearts have deceived them. They have dwelt in the cliffs of the rocks. They dwelt in the cliffs of the rocks. Those inhabitants is high, and they set themselves up high in the cliffs of the rocks. That saith in their heart, who shall bring me down to the ground? So they set themselves in high lofty places, claiming, who's going to bring me down? And if you know the historical context of what they mean by in the cliffs of the rocks, we're talking about the city of Petra. Happens to be in the location that they founded their civilization. And if you've ever seen the city of Petra, it takes a mile through this little crack through the mountains to get in there, and they have thousands of temples carved into the rock face. It's very defensible. So they're saying in their human, natural selves, they're saying, who can take me down? I'm very defensible. It's very defended. And the pride of their own hearts. I'll go ahead and give the quote that we said last week that JL definitely liked. It's from J. Vernon McGee. I've been listening to his study guides through this. The pride of their heart is the attitude of a life that declares its ability to live without God. This is what pride of the heart, within the heart, is. Another context is the nation of Edom. As we move on, I want to keep us reminded of this. The name Edom is very similar to the Hebrew word for humanity in Adam. And throughout this, Edom's actions should remind us of our selfish nature in a way. We see our prideful nature as sinful man. So we can look at that as all the heathen in a way. So, and even in the Hebrew, the name Edom, the name Adam are even spelled very similar. Just want to get that idea to mind. And remember that if we remember in Isaiah 14 and 13, this should be a familiar verse when we're talking about Satan. Satan said some very similar things about who will take me down when it comes to his pride. So Isaiah 14, 13 and 14. For thou hast said in thy heart that I will ascend into heaven, and I will exalt my throne above the stars of God, and I will sit upon the mount of the congregation, in the council of spiritual beings in which God sits over. So he wants to put himself as God, as ruler of all things seen and unseen. In the sides of the north, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, and I will be like the Most High. This was the lie in which Satan gave even to Adam and Eve. You'll be like the Most High. You'll be able to render good and evil, to be able to make that judgment call. And we have seen that we have still not been able to make that judgment call. So even what he claimed we would do did not come through. He was a liar from the beginning. Amen? This lie, this offering of you will be like God, this is going on even today. If you would think about this, the way our society is, the level of control they want us to have. They want to be gods. That's even a part of the whole evolutionary paradigm. You're going to ascend to what? Something beyond humanity one day. That's what they want to. That's the lie they want to give you. I could go on with that, but that's going a little bit more political than biblical. So just keep your mind out when you hear that kind of stuff. It's of the devil. So we know that Satan even is deceived about pride and try to lure us into sin through desiring to be like God. Before we go on to the next verse, I want to take us to Daniel chapter 4, verse 30. I may not read it verbatim, but if you want to look at it, verses 30 through Daniel 4. 30 through 32. This should be an interesting verse if you may have heard this. It's about King Nebuchadnezzar. So this is the king of Babylon. And eventually when we're going through the minor prophets, we're going to get into the Babylonian exile in a bit. But first we're focusing in a lot of the prophets that are focusing on the exile to Assyria. Then eventually Babylon went and took out Judah. Now it's appropriate to say Judah. They took Judah away into exile, and that's the entirety of the book of Daniel. But you're hearing about King Nebuchadnezzar. Again, this is the king of the world at the time. This is the powerhouse at the time period. And he's deceived, if you would read some of this, he's deceived about his own pride, and he's made into an animal, essentially, to humble him. He wants to exalt himself above the Godhead, if you will, is what he would phrase it as, which I believe Daniel taught him. This is what Yahweh is. He is the God of gods. He is the head. He is the head honcho. And even Nebuchadnezzar tried to teach his son to fear and honor the Godhead. There's even clay tablets we got now. He's trying to teach his son how to appropriately honor this right God. Because again, if I can get to the right thing. So I'll just try to read it through. There might be some point and I'll go. The king spoke and said, "Is not Babylon, great Babylon, that I have built from the house of the kingdom by the might of my power," he's boasting on his own power, "and from the honor of my majesty." These are some scary terms to build yourself up with, right? "While the words was in the king's mouth," speaking exactly, and this must have manifested in his heart for quite some time, and he had the boldness to speak about it. It says, "While things were in his mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, O Nebuchadnezzar," yet again, remember, God calls all authority into place. Our president was put into place. The president we had before here was put into place by God. So Trump or Obama, both were put in place. Regardless of how you feel about any of them, God put them in there for a reason. So you're looking at Nebuchadnezzar, which is pretty much sitting as king of the world. And there's a voice from heaven. What does he say? To thee it is spoken, the kingdom has departed you. This also kind of reminds me of David with Saul. God calls the kings into positions at points, and he strips them away regardless of by death. And a lot of them want to go out fighting, but the kingdom has departed you. And these shall driven thee from man. And the dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and shall make thee eat grass as an ox, and 7 times, meaning 7 years is I believe how they would translate that, shall pass over thee, until thee know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and give it to whom he will. No, this is a serious point to think about. God places, and this doesn't have to be the president. He places your boss over you. And it doesn't say work so your rulers ain't.
Disobey them that have rule over you, for they march for your soul.
Thank you.
Let them live with joy and not grief, that it might profit you.
Yeah. I know you know it, and that's why I was pointing at you. I know you know that. I vaguely remember that. So I'm very thankful.
Remember when I used to pull you in the office and say, it says to obey them that have rule over you.
I was just told that the other day.
See, I told you.
I want to remind you, God, we need to obey those that rule over us, because at any time, if they were that cruel to you, that God could easily do the same thing. Easily.
Can I say something right there? You know, we take out of context sometimes things. You know, we say, well, if people are in that, God must not have been in that. But that's not so. God proves people. God proves situations and seasons and all these. You know, how many times have we seen pastors and ministers and these great men of God, that we thought were great men of God fall, and all the while we're saying, well, God never put them there. Yes, God did allow them to go there, but He continually gives man a will, okay? And we make choices that are against the very will of God. I was just teaching this week in our discipleship class at the prison that there's a lot of times that we as leaders, in the kingdom of God, that God has raised us up. And I used Deborah in some of what I was teaching. Barak, he knew, but he had fear, and Deborah had the boldness to stand up in what God called her to be. A lot of times, we think about people that are in certain positions. Maybe it's over a ministry, or maybe it's over in a company or whatever. Pride cometh before the fall, and so if we allow our pride to take over, or if we don't respect those that God has placed in that position, then not only are we going to suffer the consequence, but God will never be able to trust us in a position of any authority, because we can't respect authority. If we can't respect authority, we will never be an authority. And those that kick against authority, what's that show you about them? Here, he seen himself as God. So simple. We make it hard.
Yeah. Thanks for adding that. Oh, trying to remember where I was now.
32, the end of it.
32. In the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomever he will. The same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men, and he did eat grass as an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, and till his hair was grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird claws. Again, this is talking about, I believe, the unkept nature of this. But think about it, he was driven insane. It was insanity, and we should think that claiming to be God is insanity. Claiming to be one with God is insanity. That's exactly why when Jesus makes the claims he is, he's either who he claims to be, he is the devil himself, or he is a man as crazy as one who claims to be a poached egg, as C.S. Lewis puts it. But insanity, that also, again, sidetrack there, reminds me of when King Solomon did not listen to what God said. Now, there was rules about kings of Israel. It was not to multiply their money and do not multiply their wives. When he did that, took on foreign wives, what ended up happening? He was driven insane for a period of time. His wisdom was taken from him.
Wonder why.
Yeah, again, but we're seeing that God has a very similar mode of operation when it comes to kingly rule, if you will. We see even in the heathen kingdom in which God raised up, and when Israel was in its heyday, this is kind of the same sort of punishment. But it's all about pride. We're talking about a man being turned into a beast. My commentator loves to talk about the atheist paradigm because when he was in academia, that was a big craze. But he's talking about, they want to keep saying that man came up from being an animal, but in the biblical text, that's a downgrade. Constantly a downgrade is this animalistic behavior. Let's go ahead and go to verse 4, if you will, of Obadiah. So back to Obadiah, verse 4. We also know, I'm still on that. Verse 4. Though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, hence will I bring you down, saith the Lord. Again, I told you there's two verses we talk about in Isaiah how Satan wants to put his throne above the stars of heaven. And again, that is a symbol for God's heavenly host, often, if you will. And then we also got in Daniel this representation of this beastly nature, if you will. So, exalt yourself as the eagles. Yet again, eagles fly very high up. They are perched up in high cliffs. And throughout history, the eagle has been a symbol of deity. You might have been able to see some coat of arms where you see twin-headed eagles throughout different things. I believe the Nazis used it in a lot of their imagery. And throughout history, the symbol of eagles as this authority figure of deity. So you exalt yourself as a god, if you will, we can put that. Your nests are among the stars of heaven. We know, again, they were set up in the cliffs, if you will. Again, they're high and lofty. But God says, surely, though, I'm going to have to tear you down. Anyone that builds on a foundation that is not Christ is going to have something knocked down. It's going to have to be. It's the only loving way. You got to start again. These words are also similar to Habakkuk. I think there's like two. Yeah. Habakkuk 2, verse 9. No? Okay, yeah. Woe to him that conveyeth an evil consecration to his house, that he may set his nest on high, till he may be delivered from the power of harm. Maybe I read that wrong. Woe to him in which consecrate an evil consecration to his house, that he covetous. Sorry,
An evil, covetous.
Oh, and again, reading disability. Thank you for helping me with that. That gives a whole different context to this. Covetous and evil.
You may read it out of this verse.
Thank you. Yeah.
It says, woe to him who is dishonest, who dishonestly makes wealth for his house, to place his nest on high, to escape the grasp of disaster.
translation. I need to get a simpler translation. That would have been easier to read for anyone.
Woe to them that dishonestly makes, dishonestly gets what they are trying to get.
Yes, and we were also seeing that Edom was known for their wealth, and they would be robbers. We're going to see later that while Babylon came and took Israel, they swept in also and took what wealth was essentially left over. They waited for their brother to be out of their house so they can go take all the wealth. And that's actually rather true most of the time. If there's a thief, it seems to be a family member that knows where you put things. Ain't that true?
Yep.
But also think about it even just naturally right now. Like, haven't we seen lots of schemes go on? I know you were talking about before, it's like you were dealing with Wells Fargo, right? Didn't they get caught like a year or two ago faking bank accounts to keep quotas and stuff like that? I was just hearing, was it yesterday, tax day, there was this big scam. All of these major celebrities and authority figures got their Twitters like hacked all at once. And they only made like $100,000 off of it. But it was like Bill Gates, it was like the guy who makes Tesla. All these people got Twitter hacked all in one day, which seems suspicious. But just to go try to steal like Bitcoin, and they only made like 12 Bitcoin, which wasn't even $250,000. Think how much trouble they could have done. Like, I have your Twitter account, Bill Gates. What are you going to pay me? But there's schemes and all these things that we're seeing in our own society where they're trying to build their house on these broken lines, stealing money and wealth. And yet again, as I say, woe to them that which do this evil, putting their house on high. Thank you for helping me with that, because I was tripping over that pretty hard. I've read it before a couple hours ago, but thank you. Okay, let's go to verse 5 of Obadiah now. If thieves come to thee, if robbers by night, how art thou cut off? Again, in brackets, it helps us get the context and grammar there. Would they have stolen till they had enough? This is a really interesting way to look at it. If the grape gatherers came to thee, wouldn't they not leave some grapes? Yet again, if a thief comes into your house, he's not going to steal, I don't know, your plushie collection. They're not going to go in there and steal your building blocks for your kids now, are they? I remember a long time ago, there was a show I used to watch, and I forget what channel. I think it might have been Discovery or something like that. They had two ex-criminals come in, and they would say, how secure do you think your house is? It's like, okay, the next week we're going to break in, and we'll see how secure it is, and then afterwards we'll go tell you what you needed to do. And they would break into people's houses all the time. They said in 15 minutes they can go get what they want and leave. They're turning over couches. They're flipping over like picture frames to see if you have money up under them. They're just looking for your cash. They're saying, oh, you have a dog? You think that dog's tough? I'm just got a steak in my pocket. I'll throw it and see what happens. Really? So when the Bible here is talking about, it says if a thief comes by night, it's like, why don't you just steal what he wants? He'll take what he wants. And then if the grape gatherer comes, it's like, why don't you leave some? This parallels a few things that are later in Scripture. Because the next verse kind of gives a context to that. But in 1 Thessalonians 5 and 2, you hear, for yourselves, in which the Lord cometh as a thief in the night. And he essentially says, so you should be expecting. It shouldn't surprise you, essentially, is what that verse was going into. But God compares himself. God knows what his people. He knows what's been called by his name. He knows what has been drawn by the Holy Spirit. Eventually, rapture-esque, take us out of the world. He'll come for what he needs. He comes for what his treasure was. Again, we're his valuable treasure. He'll come. But yet again, also in Revelations, we get another representation of gathering of grapes. Gathering of grapes here in Revelation 14, 17, and 20, which I think maybe the last three different minor prophets. I kept pulling this up, but to me it's very interesting. So in Revelation 14, 17, and 20, and another angel came out of the temple which was in heaven, also with a sharp sickle. And another came out of the altar which had the power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sickle, saying, Thrust in the sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, and her grapes were fully ripe. Again, they're only picking full ripe grapes. I would not go to my apple tree right now and give an apple tree update. It's still falling my apples, and I still tell them, "Why then you don't fall in your own time when you get fruit? Stop doing that." But again, I want to go pick my apples right now. They're really puny. They're not full of the nutrients that it should be. But yet again, it says the grape gatherer is only going to gather the full grapes. So here in 19, and the angel thrust his sickle into the earth and gathered the grapes on the earth, and it was cast into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was turned without the city, and the blood came out of the winepress even unto the horse's bridle by the space of 1,006 furlongs. We know at the end of the world there's going to be this dividing of the wheat and the chaff. We know there's going to be the wicked punished, and God is glorified by this judgment because they've had their time. And if you're disturbed by this idea of God's judgment, then we need to be about the business of telling people how not to be a part of that particular portion. Just going to be real. If that disturbs you. But we know that, and again, there's also the feast in which all those that are gathered by God come to this beautiful ceremony of the marriage between Jesus and his bride, the church. Or Israel, where I believe we're very linked. But yet again, I want you to have those images when we're talking about a thief and a winepress. I believe those images are being drawn on with those verses. But here, we're back in Obadiah. Sorry for bouncing around. Verse 6, we kind of get a context. So God says, a thief will just take what he wants. And the guy going out to pick grapes, he's only going to pick the choicest grapes. He's not going to pick something that ain't in season yet. But God says, how are the things of Esau searched out, and how are the hidden things sought up? And in this commentary, he draws on someone else that does a kind of a translation. I think it's a little clearer with it. It says, how are the things of Esau stripped bare? They're evident, they're clear. What is God essentially saying here? He sees what Esau's been up to. He knows where his treasure is hidden. He knows what sins he's committed. I want to read a few verses about how God can see everything, material and immaterial. He sees the thoughts of your heart. So in Proverbs 15 and 3, the eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the good and the evil. I'm going to go to Job 28, 24. For he looketh to the ends of the earth, and seeth under the whole heaven. Psalms 44, 21. Shall not God search things out? For he knoweth the secret of the heart. And then God knows these things. He sought out Esau. He knows what Edom's plan and what they've done. And what this is also saying is God is going to utterly destroy them. A thief would leave something, but God's wrath won't be as words I would use I don't think would be necessarily appropriate. A thief would not be as all-encompassing, if you will. God's going to utterly destroy Edom. I believe this is also how God pretty much knowing that Esau did not want his birthright. We were talking about Esau's history with Jacob last week. And we knowing the birthright means a relationship with God. It means being the priesthood for the family. And then again, he knew that he would rather give it up for mere food, which God will destroy the stomach and food. He can destroy both. And this is interesting because we're drawing about Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar did take Egypt into exile, and as far as what I can see, again, this is a hard book to date. But I would believe it's probably post-exile in Babylon, because Babylon took Israel, but at one point they were the ones that actually destroyed Edom, which is pretty interesting because Edom's saying, they're pretty much, in the next few verses we're going to hear, they were pretty much Babylon's cheerleaders. They were on the sidelines, like, yeah, get them, because it will wipe out my brother forever. The funny thing is, didn't Israel come back? And I think a lot of countries in the world today find it very odd that Israel keeps coming back. They're pretty mad. They're pretty similar to how Edom's like, come on, get them. If they would just get out of the way, maybe we can have this political deal that will give us some wealth, because I really doubt they care about peace in the Middle East. Like, oh, we'll get some money, we can move troops, If Israel just wasn't in the way, didn't have this holy divine claim to piece of land, to be honest, is there any real, can't really grow much. Like, think about it, it's not very the best right now position to own, but everyone wants it. That was a rabbit trail I didn't intend, but
no, I mean, but it's a true statement. Think about it. I mean, it is a very tiny country, and and for millennia, people have tried to destroy it, yet it's still there. The people are still there, and it cannot be wiped from God's hands upon it.
Then I read somewhere that it said, I guess they were about to be overtaken because they owed another country money. And the day that they were supposed to take it over, they found 300 whales of oil in one day.
God always makes a way.
Only thing.
Always.
I was listening to the audio Bible, and my ears perked up when I was listening to Romans, and it was talking about Rachel and about Jacob and Esau. And so, if you don't mind, I was going to share some of the verses that I went back and looked up. And it says that that Rebecca also had conceived. Now, this is going back to talking about how we got to Edom, it being about Esau. It says that Rebecca also had conceived by one man, even by her father Isaac. And for the children not yet being born, now listen to this, the children not yet being born, nor having done any good or evil, that the purpose of God, according to the election, might stand, not of works, but of him who calls. And that was very important, because God's will is going to be done. And then going on down, it says, let me see where it is. For this very purpose I have raised you up, that I might show my power in you, and that my name may be declared in all the earth. He's still declaring his name throughout all the earth, just from that divide between Jacob and Esau. Israel. And all because of the twins being in a mother's womb, and she's got two nations in her womb, that his purpose is going to be fulfilled.
God has a purpose for everything. Now, are we this side of heaven going to understand it? Because I don't think everyone right now is going to pick up a book and be like, oh, God finally explained why all that morning sickness was. Because that's how I'm sitting there trying to think like just humanly. What was Rebecca going through at the time? It's like, oh man, it feels like, oh, this is worse. This is really bad. But God, why? And be like, 2 nations? Like, good, but can I get something for the stomach? Stomach pain or something. I'm trying to think about the humanity of that. But through that, we lead on, and we're reading about it now. We're seeing how Esau can be a very symbol of the godly and the ungodly, or in a way, the Jew and the Gentile, or something like that. In a way, I'm not trying to be tactical, but you see that imagery of where there is the called of God that are separated out of the world, and we see another outside with a different value system pressing in and grasping, but God will show His strength and His mercy and His guidance through how both the godly deal with the ungodly. That's how. Thank you for sharing that. That is another verse that's pretty difficult to read through. But yes, thank you for that. Let's go to 7 in Obadiah. 7 in Obadiah. Okay. All the men of thy confederacy have brought thee then to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have devoured thee. They have prevailed against thee. They have eaten thy bread, have laid a wound upon thee. There is no understanding in him. So this is rather interesting. Yet again, there's an interesting thing to say about a person can be said a lot about their company. To be honest, I remember in the early years of dating my wife. She was a new convert, and she was dealing with her old friends and stuff like that. And I'm just saying, like, can't you realize that these people are just not a good example? I know you want to get away from certain troubles that you have, but like, you don't hear how these people talk. But it's similar to this. So Edom, yet again, is not the best nation. And you're sitting there and saying, these people in which you trust, these people that you make your war pacts with, again, there's a different term for that, or make these plans with, don't you know that one day they're going to destroy you? These buddy people that you have with you are going to wipe you out. And say, brought thee even to the border. Now that's rather interesting, because I was studying some more, and I found even more historical context that we can go to. When it comes especially to Israel and the border of Edom. It's always been kind of a trouble spot. I'm going to go to Numbers. Hopefully I can read through it without being vexed. Numbers 20, 14 and 21. And Moses sent messengers from Kadesh. This time that was the right Kadesh. The last time I used Kadesh, I mixed that place up. Unto the king of Edom. Again, this is the days of Moses, so this is the exile in the wilderness here. So, to the king of Edom, thus saying, thy brother Israel, so he's pulling all family ties. Hey, I'm your brother, man. But can you help me out here? Israel, thou knowest all the trials that have been befallen us. We have a similar history here. How our fathers went down to Egypt, and we had dwelled in Egypt a long time, and the Egyptians vexed us and our fathers. And when we cried unto the Lord, and He heard our voice, sent an angel, and He had brought us forth out of the land of Egypt. We're out of Egypt. And behold, we are in Kadesh, a city in the uttermost of thy border. So, hey, we're happy to be here. Let us pass, I pray thee, through thy country, we will not pass through the fields or through the vineyards, near will we drink the water of thy wells. We will go by the king's highway. We will not turn to the right or the left until we have passed through thy border. He's saying here, and I think it's simple, because you know how many people was on this journey, right? I've been a lot of people to go walk through your crops. It's real. It's like, hey, we know that would be trouble. We're not going to walk through your crops. We're not walking through your vineyards. Hey, we're not going to even trouble you by getting water from your well. You won't have to worry about running out. Like, just let us slip by, please. Let us get by. It's interesting. Edom said unto him, Thou shalt not pass through me, lest I will come against thee with the sword. And the children of Israel said unto him, We will go by the highway, and if I and my cattle drink of thy water, I will pay for it, and I will only, without doing anything else, go through on my feet. He says, it's like, hey, come on, man. It's like, I'll even pay for whatever we end up using. Please just let us pass through. And he said, Thou shalt not go through. And Edom came out against the people of Israel and had a strong hand. And Edom refused to give Israel passage through his border. Therefore Israel turned away from him. And yet again we saw in Obadiah is like these people in which he allowed to be a part through their border. Like, don't you know these people you had feast acts with are going to devour you and eat your bread and lay a wound on you? Which Edom desired to lay a wound on Israel at this time. Israel said, I don't even want none of your bread. If we happen to get into your water, I'll gladly compensate you for it. So the people that he didn't let in would have done none of these things. And the people that he was friends and buddy with will do all and more against Edom. I find that historical comparison, and for anyone that wants to write a note of, there's a similar account of this in Deuteronomy 2, 1 through 18. I'm not going to read it because it's a very similar account. But if you would want to take note of for future reading, Deuteronomy says similar of the historical account we had. So let's go to verse 8 of Obadiah. Shall I not in that day, saith the Lord, even destroy the wise men of Edom and understanding out of the mount of Esau? Yet again, Edom in a lot of different countries at this time were very into mysticism. They had their gods, they made their sacrifices. And I will remind you that a lot of people, even people that do mysticism now, what does it seem to always be about? I want to know the future so I can make decisions. I want to know who I marry so I go and say Bloody Mary in the bathroom mirror. And I walk up the steps and they all know who I'm going to marry. That's a thing that goes on, if you remember how that tradition goes. I go read tarot cards so I know what job I'm going to pick. So God, what I believe God's saying is saying, you may have wise men that can do divinations, can do their scrying. It'll be for naught, because regardless of what they know, I will utterly destroy them. There's wise people that want to do, think about stock market. They play the stock market, which is just, probably more consistent lottery. I can pull out my money if I wanted to and maybe break even. Or I can lose it all. So we can think about, there's wise men with understanding that think they understand things, they make their plans. And without God, it goes to ruin. How many times have I heard a story about people saying, I bought my dream house near the river, and God just kept telling me, for some reason, to sell it. I'm like, this is my dream house. I dreamed for years. And I'm like, okay, we'll sell it. And then once they sell it and the person buys it, it gets wiped out because the rivers overflow. You can make all these dreams and these plans, but if you don't have a place for God to guide your steps, it's utterly foolish. Okay. Let's go to 9. We'll see if we can get through 9. And the mighty men. Again, this is strength. Think about people that are wise that can plan for things, and people that are strong that can get the work done. That seems to happen to be the case. O mighty men, O Teman, T-E-M-A-N, which, again, I'll explain it later. Let's read the verse. Teman shall be dismayed, and the end that everyone, to the end that every one of the mount of Esau shall be cut off by slaughter. Now, this is where I'm going to talk about a little bit more of the family history here, I guess. So Esau happened to have a grandson, and that's a Teman. Again, T-E-M-A-N. We'll read it. And he happened to be, gives kind of a pet name for the southern portion of Esau's kingdom, seeing they like to name after family people and whatnot. And he's saying, I'll utterly cut this off. Do we really hear about Edomites today? There's a certain group that likes to bring it up, and they're extremely racist. The Hebrew Israelite group, if anyone knows about it, I won't go any further. They want to claim a certain group to be Edom and Esau. We hear a lot of what it is, but it's pretty much, they're cut off. They've been wiped out. You don't hear of, you can't point to me on a map and tell me where this country is what I'm trying to say here. But even with that, it seems to be, again, this is a lot of what my extra notes have talked about through my Bible, that the Edomites became the Emidians. Anybody know exactly what I'm talking about? The I-D-U-N-E-A-N-S. They assimilated with a couple of other countries and they became Emidians. So that's an interesting fact. And I was reading here that they were talking about, ironically, King Herod considered himself an Emidian, or I can't I gave you the spelling just in case you wanted to check me up on it. But King Herod considered himself one of those. So yet again, thinking about a little bit out of the context of what we were studying, but when Rome came into power, they didn't even put a Jew on the throne. They essentially put an Edomite. You know how mad they must have been about that? No wonder they didn't like that king. No wonder he couldn't rule worth anything, because he didn't know the things of God. Yet again, it would be a complete insult to call a Jewish person an Edomite. They know this to love. But God has utterly cut them off. There is not a nation of Edom. I don't think you can point to a particular people group and consider them that. And I would use this verse to claim that against people, and that claim that a certain group is another. That's a kind of a different topic if we ever do polemics or something. But I think that's where I feel comfortable leaving off, is at verse 9, where God is saying He is going to utterly cut them off, and regardless of by strength or by wisdom, destruction, this judgment of God.
You know, Josh, you said the Hebrew Israelites. I have a whole group of men that are claiming to be that, and so I had to do some study on that, and they are almost like a sector that nobody recognizes. The Jews don't recognize them. Islam don't recognize them. None of them. They are like a tribe of gypsies. And they are not recognized by any of the traditional doctrines, I'll say it that way. But they want to be recognized by several different faiths. Like they want to follow the feast and all of that of the Jews. They want the kosher food, but they don't want to recognize the they recognize the Torah, but they don't want to recognize how they reverence God, okay? Yahshua. You know, they don't want that. But then they don't want the Islam because they don't want it to be governed by man. In other words, they're that group that does not want, they want all the perks with no confession, you know. And when I was studying that, I found it very, very intriguing to me that they would adapt what they want that would feed their flesh, but not spirit.
Yeah, I listened to a guy named Vocab Malone that does a lot of study. He witnesses against a lot of these groups, and there's different, they call them camps. So their denominations are called camps, and they are very diverse in what they will end up believing. A lot of them are militant, and some of them try not to be. And I think when I was hearing a lot of the study, it's like a lot of it started up here in Columbus, like less than 60 years ago, or something like that. It started here in either Columbus or Cleveland. It's an interesting group. That people
For a
know.
lack of a better word that they use, they call them vagabonds. You know? And what is that? That's not even knowing what you identify with.
Yeah, I had a guy at my work that identified as that, and he was just like, you know about the exile of the Jews, and we would talk about stuff because it's like I was the only guy that knew about the Old Testament, but I'm like, it's more than just a one race thing. Like, if it says all of creation cried out, this is probably bigger than we'll ever even know.
Yeah.